Georgia lore is full of tall tales about legendary creatures and mystical places. In this episode of Georgia Outdoors, we'll take a closer look at some of these stories, both real and imagined. We'll also set the record straight on some popular wildlife lore. Next on Georgia Outdoors.
Funding for Georgia Outdoors has been made possible by a grant from Mary Hall Singleton and by the Imlay Foundation.
We are fascinated by the unknown because it's in our genes. It's been there since we were living in caves and trying to figure out what went on in the night and what creatures were hostile out there. And it's our connection to our past. We no longer have mortal dangers, but we like the idea of it.
Georgia, with its miles of wilderness, mysterious swampland, and diversity of wildlife, is fertile ground for unusual tales from the natural world. Southeastern lore is filled with stories of mysterious creatures, unusual places, and strange animal behavior. Whether it's sightings of species thought long extinct or stories of creatures nowhere in the scientific record, Georgia has it all. Situated in the southwest corner of the state, the Okefenokee Swamp is a rich source for tales of the unexplained.
The Okefenokee Swamp has every kind of mystery imaginable. For one thing, it's vast. It's 40 miles long and 20 miles wide. And most of us don't want to go into a place like that. There are animals there that will eat you, not to mention the snakes. Naturally, we can see Bigfoot living there. We can see UFOs using that as a landing site. And on occasion, people hear drumming when they're out there. There's swamp gas, of course, which is naturally occurring as vegetation degrades and deteriorates. You have these patches of light that just appear and float like a ghost. And so there are many stories of ghost lights down there.
Joe and Steve Knight are familiar with many of these stories. They run Okefenokee Pastimes, an outpost for ecotourism on the eastern side of the swamp.
We're known as those UFO people out at the swamp.
When somebody does see something in the area, they tend to call us and tell us about it.
We have our X-Files extraterrestrial investigation team, Mulder and Scully here, that go out and check out all these sightings. The Okefenokee X-Files is a series of stories that we've put together through research. Some from old newspaper articles, some from books that were written about supernatural occurrences. There's stories about Bigfoot sightings and ghostly sightings, UFO encounters. Now, I think why the Okefenokee is so full of myth, it's a swamp. And I think people don't understand swamps, just in general. And this is a big one. And because of a place this large, it has that much wildness to it, it's going to foster all sorts of things. They don't know what's in this thing. There are remote areas of the swamp that you can only get to by helicopter. Who knows what could be in there? We could have a Bigfoot that lives in the swamp.
Of course, no proof of Bigfoot or other mythic swamp dwellers has ever surfaced. There are, however, a few legendary creatures that did once roam this fantastic ecological resource. Historically, the Okefenokee Swamp was great habitat for the Ivory Billed Woodpecker.
The Ivory Billed Woodpecker is a large woodpecker, larger than a pileated woodpecker, and it has a pattern of white on the wings that is distinctive. There's a white trailing edge and a white leading edge to the wing, whereas the pileated only has a white leading edge that's on the top surface of the wing and the front.
Until recently, the last ivory-billed woodpecker sighting in the U.S. was in 1971. But in 2005, Gene Sparling caught sight of what looked to be an ivory-billed while canoeing in Arkansas. With help from the Nature Conservancy, Gene is now speaking publicly about this rare sighting, and an extensive search is underway to find and document the bird in Arkansas.
My boat came around a slight bend in the river, and a large woodpecker dropped in from above the canopy down into the channel. He had a very long neck, light-colored bill, and he moved in a particularly animated, herky-jerky motion.
The ivory bill is seen as an iconic bird for a variety of reasons. I mean, it's a symbol of everything we've done wrong with our natural resources. We took all of the forests of the southeast that it needed. But it's also iconic because rumors of it refused to die, even after it was supposedly extinct in 1944.
Sparling's discovery prompted great interest in this bird. Recently, the search for ivory-billed woodpeckers has spread to Georgia.
Georgia is within the historical range of the ivory-billed woodpecker. We think they probably occurred throughout much of the coastal plain, particularly along the big river bottom swamps. I think most people had pretty much accepted the fact that ivory-bill was gone from this country and probably gone from the world. The recent possible rediscovery in Arkansas has rekindled our hopes that maybe, if it still occurs in Arkansas, maybe it still occurs other places. And so we started thinking about taking another look at some areas of large tracts of remote habitat in Georgia, such as the Okefenokee Swamp. If we don't find anything, we can never say they're not there, but if they're there, we certainly want to know about it so that we can help to conserve that habitat and manage that species. And if we put a little effort into looking, then who knows what we might come up with.
So when we go out to survey habitat for ivory bills, we are looking at foraging sign. We're looking at trees that have been the bark stripped off of the trees in the woodpecker's search for grubs. So this is a red bay that's been foraged on by pileated woodpeckers. So we'll be looking for trees that have kind of all the bark stripped off of them. Sometimes they will have small pits in them, and sometimes you will see actually grooves that have been made by the ivory bill's bill, or the pileated's bill. In most of these cases, pileateds will have done the scaling. But what we're searching for is the rare case when an ivory bill might have been involved in doing the scaling. And we're also doing some audio playback, and that is playing an ivory bill's call that was recorded in 1933 in the film done by Cornell. We'll play that out through a speaker for a minute, and then we'll listen for 10 minutes and then repeat it in an opposite direction. And we're basically trying to see if there's a response. If there's ivory bills in the area, if they respond, we'd be able to pick that up, and then we'd either go in and try to find those or hopefully record it on our handheld camcorders.
While the chance of finding an ivory-billed in Georgia is slim, the value of conserving this pristine habitat is limitless. Beyond the Okefenokee, bottomland hardwood areas around the Savannah, Ogeechee, and Altamaha rivers would also make good potential ivory-billed habitat. Over the past several years, a serious effort has helped to protect the same areas that were once home to these historic birds.
The Nature Conservancy, in cooperation with the Georgia Department of Natural Resources and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, has protected more than 79,000 acres of lands and waters along the Altamaha River system. The rediscovery of the ivory-billed woodpecker is a powerful reminder that there is still time out there to conserve important areas for habitat protection. It gives us hope that we can make a difference and can work to protect these natural areas.
Meanwhile, the search continues.
It's my hope that the search effort will eventually result in the recovery of a viable population of birds. Certainly not in our lifetimes, but perhaps my grandchildren's grandchildren will be able to see an ivory-billed woodpecker fly through the woods as Teddy Roosevelt did when he cried, "Lord God, what a bird."
The altamaha is the site of another legendary creature. Near Darien, Georgia's answer to the Loch Ness monster, the altamaha-ha, a serpentine creature some 30 feet in length, is said to roam the river waters.
The Tama Indians of that area reported a great serpent in the river that hissed and screamed. In recent decades, as more people move down to that area, and more people buy boats, and more people are fishing and hunting, the reports have skyrocketed. There's estimates that perhaps there have been 300 different sightings of altamaha-ha. So there is something in the river.
Kathleen Russell, editor of the Darien News, has reported on many sightings of the altamaha-ha over the past 2 decades.
The altamaha-ha has become a beloved part of McIntosh County, even though he's pretty elusive, but a loving creature. It's just been kind of part of the community and part of what we are or what we might not know that we are. It's a fun thing for us to have, the altamaha-ha.
Reports of the creature basking along the mudbanks or swimming along the surface of the water have trickled in over the years. Scotty Rogers, former mayor of Darien, reports having seen the altamaha-ha while driving along Highway 17.
On December 23rd, 1993, got on the Champney River Bridge. I looked to the west, and I could see something that looked like a tractor trailer in a tube, inflated, coming out of the water. But it was coming vertical. Finally, a neck came out of the water, and then a body, something as big as an automobile. And this neck was attached to it, and it looked like it was 18 to 24 inches in diameter. Then it looked like a horse's head on it without any ears.
Many scientific explanations for the altamaha-ha have been offered over the years. Some believe the creature to be an Atlantic sturgeon, a large prehistoric-looking fish which migrates from the ocean up the Altamaha River. These fish can reach sizes over 300 pounds and lengths of more than 8 feet. Doug Peterson of the University of Georgia is conducting research on the Atlantic sturgeon population along the Altamaha.
The Altamaha is one of the premier sturgeon-producing rivers in the world. We've caught specimens in excess of 300 pounds. So they're large fish, but they're rather docile. They do have large armored plates all over their bodies. Of course, it always is possible that the altamaha-ha is something that scientists just don't know about. It doesn't have anything to do with sturgeon, so the mystery goes on. We'll probably never know exactly what the altamaha-ha is.
Other strange creature sightings in Georgia involve big cats or panthers.
The big cat we now know is the Florida panther, which only occurs in extreme South Florida, and there's maybe 70 or 80 individuals known to exist there. Once occurred throughout Georgia and other states in the southeast. We're pretty certain that the native population of big cats disappeared from Georgia several decades ago. Cats that do still live in Georgia, of course, we do have bobcats, which are significantly smaller than a panther or a cougar would be. They're spotted and certainly have a short tail. One distinguishing characteristic about the cougar or the panther is they have a very long, thick tail, and that should be very noticeable in most situations.
We get a lot of reports to our office about potential sightings of black panthers or Florida panthers, but most of them are of some other animal. And there's an example of one that was sent to our office a few years ago.
Now, that's a sure black panther.
People were observing some type of large dark cat, they thought, across a slough of a lake, and it's walking against the backdrop of some cypress trees. And from a distance, which is hard to judge across that lake, it does look like a big cat, and the trees look very big. But if you start looking closer and go to the site, the trees are actually much smaller than they appear, and the cat was also much smaller, and it turned out to be clearly a house cat once you got there and looked at the tracks and measured the size against the trees.
Over generations, many wives' tales have been passed down about our native species. We'll run through a few of the most notable ones, beginning with the species that is perhaps the #1 source of misunderstanding: snakes.
There are a lot of fears and misconceptions about snakes, and probably derives from a couple of things. First of all, the fact that some of them are venomous and capable of killing people. That fear is probably overblown, at least in Georgia with our species. We have less than 1 person on average a year killed by a snake bite.
Snake lore is filled with stories of hoop snakes, which travel by rolling like a wheel, tail in mouth, to attack, and coach whip snakes which lash their victim to death with sharp whip-like tails. There is no evidence of such behavior, but in the animal world, truth can be much more interesting than fiction, and snakes are a fascinating species.
All species of snakes can swim. That doesn't mean that all species of snakes readily take to water, but you can put any snake in water and it will not drown. It's going to swim effectively. Eastern diamondback rattlesnakes, which for the most part are thought of as an upland species, are very good swimmers and will disperse quite a ways over water, including over salt water or salt marsh. We have eastern diamondbacks on probably every one of our barrier islands. They're occasionally seen in the surf as they're dispersing. Cottonmouths can bite underwater. That's something that folks often say they're not able to do, but they eat fish, they eat things that occur underwater, so of course they're able to bite underwater. However, they're not likely to be in fear of predation when they're underwater. If you're in the water with them, they would rather swim away, so it's not like it's something that you really have to worry about.
Despite having no appendages, snakes are very versatile animals and can climb as well.
We do have a couple of species that are specialized for climbing vertical surfaces of trees. Our rat snakes and our corn snakes can climb just inserting their belly scales into the grooves of pine bark or a pretty rough surfaced hardwood. They can do that as well. Snakes belong here just like all of our wildlife, just like we do, and to me that's good enough reason why people should respect them and leave them alone. They do serve ecological roles that are important. They serve both as important prey for a lot of animals, and they serve as important predators for a lot of animals.
Long connected with darkness, vampires, and things that go bump in the night, bats also prompt a lot of misunderstanding.
I think the habits of bats have caused them to be sort of associated with evil and bad things. I mean, the fact they hide out during the daytime and come out at night, that's a little odd because it's different from what we're used to doing. Our culture is one that has tended to look at bats negatively. Now, the Chinese culture, on the other hand, tends to have a positive view of bats. They're seen as symbols of good luck. So it's not universal that bats are thought of badly. Georgia's home to about 16 different species of bats. One of the legends about bats, or the myths, is that they're going to come down and get tangled up in your hair intentionally. And of course, this is not something they do intentionally. It probably hardly ever happens at all. They want to be left alone. They want to find a place to hide and just eat insects, and that's what makes them happy. Another misconception is that bats are blind. They all have eyes and they all can see. The eyes are small and may sometimes go unnoticed, but they do have them. And at nighttime, they don't really use eyesight so much because they have the ability to use echolocation, and they'll send out certain kinds of sound waves that bounce off their surroundings that enables them to miss trees and walls when they're flying around. It also enables them to find food.
Like bats, owls have an association with the night and darkness that has inspired far-fetched theories.
People feel that if you hear a screech owl calling outside your house, that someone in your house will soon die. And of course, that isn't the case, but we still get calls from people that say, "Golly, what's going to happen? We heard something in our backyard. Is somebody going to die?" And we'll tell them no. There's also a myth that the owl can turn its head 360 degrees. Now, it can turn its head around far further than any other animal, but you will never see. It's not physiologically possible or anatomically possible to turn your head totally around. And so what happens is that they can get to a certain point, and then they're going to have to flip their head around very rapidly and then go at it from the other angle.
Other bird behaviors have also been the source of misunderstanding. The hummingbird, with its slight build and demure behavior, might seem incapable of the long migration it makes across the Gulf of Mexico from South America. But in fact, hummingbirds make this trip annually. Stories have arisen describing hummingbirds hitching rides on the backs of geese.
Obviously, it's not true. You find, for example, that Canada geese don't migrate to Mexico and Central America. In fact, most of the geese that you see in the eastern United States are essentially non-migratory at the present time.
The purple martin is a songbird that has also sparked wild migration theories. Many people believe that before migrating, purple martin flocks send a few scouts to scope out locations.
From all of the banding information that we have, we find that that doesn't seem to be the case. We find that the purple martin scouts are typically the oldest birds in the flock, and they may stay at a site, particularly if they've nested at that site before. And then in a few days, the rest of the birds that will be nesting at that particular location will arrive on their own. I think the reason people come up with these interesting stories is they make good story fodder. There are so many amazing things that are true about wildlife that if people just researched it a little bit, or we did a little bit better job of telling people some of the fascinating stories that do exist out there in the natural world, they're every bit as interesting as these fanciful folk tales that we come up with and choose to believe.
In the outdoors, insect bites, allergies, and other minor irritants are common. Here are the facts on a few homespun remedies you may have heard. Covering chigger bites with clear nail polish has little effect. Contrary to popular belief, chiggers do not burrow into your skin. Jellyfish stings should be rinsed immediately with salt water. Baking soda or meat tenderizer may help, but fresh water, alcohol, and urine are not effective treatments and may encourage the release of more venom. While tobacco can reduce the pain of a bee sting, it is not recommended. Use ice instead. It's best to scrape the affected area with a hard, flat item such as a credit card to remove the stinger. Before trying any home remedy, be sure to consult a physician and be safe when enjoying the great outdoors.
The Okefenokee isn't the only area of Georgia rich with myth. Georgia's landscape is dotted with areas that have provoked wild tales through the years. One of the most well-known of these sites is the rock wall at Fort Mountain.
The wall stretches for over 800 feet near the top of the mountain. It goes from a rock cliff on one side around to a rock cliff on the other side. It meanders. I think most people find it intriguing because we don't know much about its origin. Who built it, why they built it. It's probably ceremonial in nature, but that really doesn't tell us why the people expended so much energy to climb this mountain and bring all of these rocks and pile them up.
And what really frustrates archaeologists is they rarely find artifacts in these places because they were kept ceremonially clean. But there's a lot of stories about Fort Mountain, and supposedly there are times when Native American ghosts appear, and they're walking on the mountain, and from there they step off into the stars. There's astronomers who believe that Fort Mountain is oriented to sunrises, particularly on the summer solstice.
The Cherokees, of course, had a legend that it was built by a strange race of people that they pushed out as they moved into the southern Appalachian.
The exact origin and purpose of this rock wall may never be known. Today, Fort Mountain is home to a lush state park open to the public with trails for hiking, biking, and horseback riding. Views from the overlooks are spectacular. Near Eatonton, Georgia, another prehistoric mystery exists. The rock eagle effigy.
About 3,000 years ago, Native Americans around Eatonton decided to build a huge eagle effigy, and they brought in thousands and thousands of stones from the surrounding countryside, and they built up this gigantic image of an eagle. The wings are spread, it's 120 feet wide, and the body rises up 10 feet from the ground, and it's quite a sight. The people there built a 3-story observation tower, and to truly appreciate the eagle, you have to climb to the top of it to see the whole image, and it will take your breath away. It's beautiful.
While the purpose of the rock eagle effigy is unclear, archaeological excavations at other prehistoric sites, such as the mounds at Etowah and the unusual shell rings of Sapelo Island on Georgia's coast, have helped unlock mysteries of Georgia's past.
Georgia's been occupied for probably around 12 or 13,000 years, maybe a little bit longer than that. And what makes Georgia so special is that many of those sites are so well preserved. Archaeology tells us the story of who we are and how we got to where we are today in ways that written history cannot.
Beyond these rich cultural sites, Georgia's diverse geology has sparked a number of legends. One of our most fabled geologic features is Tallulah Gorge. With a name derived from a Cherokee word meaning fearsome, Tallulah Gorge has inspired fear and fascination for centuries.
The Cherokee Indians were afraid of Tallulah Gorge. It was so dangerous to get down to the bottom, and the water made such a roaring sound, it became one of the entrances to hell. And they told stories that a hunting party disappeared. And so a larger group of Indians went to check it out, and they were met by these pygmy-like creatures who were very, very vicious, very violent. And so they became convinced that their hunting party had been killed by these pygmies, and so they would refuse to go down to the gorge.
These are but a few sites around Georgia that have inspired a wealth of imaginative tales. Over time, through science and exploration, we've overcome our fears of such places and come to grips with many of the creatures once thought to lurk in the shadows. But in the process, we find that the truth is often more interesting than anything in our dreams or nightmares.
Funding for Georgia Outdoors has been made possible by a grant from Mary Hall Singleton and by the Imlay Foundation.